Hi, everyone. I hope you guys are all doing well today. I'm Samuela, and today I'll be talking about Pride Month. So as it is the month of June, we take the time to celebrate the LGBTQIA2S+ community. To begin this presentation, I would like to start with a quote. Love should never mean having to live in fear. Deshane Stokes. So to begin off this webinar, we'll start with an introduction to the key terms, concepts, and the meaning behind LGBTQIA2S+. So first, we'll begin with the types of attraction. So first, we have sexual attraction, the desire to be with someone or on an intimate physical level. Then we have aesthetic attraction, purely referring to appearance, when one appreciates someone else's looks on a less intimate level. Then we have romantic attraction, the desire or yearning to connect with someone romantically, which focuses on experiences/benefits that are mutual. Then we have physical attraction, the desire to be physically close to someone, touch in a less sexual way. Then we have emotional attraction, the desire for emotional intimacy, sharing hopes, fears, ideas, and values. So this is a rainbow flag. The first rainbow flag, the symbol for the gay community, was first designed in 1978 by openly gay man and a drag queen, Gilbert Baker. He revealed that Harvey Milk, one of the first openly gay elected officials in the US, urged Baker to design the rainbow flag. So these are the colors of the rainbow flag, and they have specific meanings. So hot pink means sex, red refers to light, orange healing, yellow sunlight, green nature, turquoise art, indigo harmony, and violet spirit. Today, many different gender identities and sexual orientations have adopted their own flags to represent their distinct communities with the larger LGBTQ+ community. So we're going to go over the meaning of LGBTQIA2S+. So the L standing for lesbian. An individual who identifies as a woman is attracted to other women. Then we have gay, the G. An adjective that describes an individual who identifies as a man is attracted to other men. It is also used as an umbrella term for anyone who's attracted to the same gender that they identify with. Then we have B, standing for bisexual. An individual who is attracted to both people of their own gender and other genders. Then we have transgender, a term used to describe individuals whose sex assigned to them at birth is different from their gender identity. Many people who fit outside of the gender binary also identify as trans, although some identify with trans masculine and trans feminine. Then we have the term queer, standing for the Q. The word queer was originally a derogatory word for people of sexual minorities, particularly gay men. Many people in the LGBTQ community have reclaimed the word as a means of empowerment rather than disempowerment. Often used as an umbrella term that encapsulates all sexual orientations and gender identities in this community, it amplifies that gender and sexual orientation can be fluid. Savan C. Patton, who identifies as queer, trans, and non-binary, states, "I know how empowering it feels to reclaim words that have been used to harm us, and I appreciate queer swiftly because it has always carried a sense of undefined abstractness." Although it's important to note that this word has not been fully embraced by all, and many people still find it offensive. But today, however, we will be using it in a positive and empowering light. Q can also stand for questioning. Those questioning their identity might temporarily describe themselves as questioning before identifying with another sexual orientation. Then we have I, intersexual. Individual who is born with a combination of any sort of both male and female sexual organs. Often the sex that they are raised as poses challenges as they may not identify with their assigned sex. Then we have A, standing for asexual. Individual who does not feel, or rather really feels attracted to another individual. Then we have 2S, standing for two-spirited. A term used by indigenous people. All two-spirited individuals identify as or are part of the indigenous community. They identify as having both masculine and feminine spirit. And then we have the plus, used to include other members in the community that might not identify with the other letters in the term. It's also an inclusive way to represent other gender identities and sexual identities. So we're going to talk about intersectionality. Many Pride events today do not recognize intersectionality of Pride, more specifically the contributions of the BIPOC people. Black, standing for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The Pride flag has been adapted to represent more communities. Intersectionality awareness is essential to acknowledge, understand, and evolve our perspectives. Racism, ableism, and sexism can be prevalent in the LGBT community, LGBTQ plus community, and in Pride organizations. So we must actively promote diverse, queer voices. So moving on, we'll be talking about the brief history of taking a look at the LGBTQ2S movement throughout time. So this is the historical timeline. So starting in 1749, Thomas Cannon wrote the first public defense for homosexuality. Then moving on to 1924, Henry Garber forms the first homosexual group in the US, the Society for Human Rights. In 1950, the Manchin Society, the first lasting gay organization, is formed in Los Angeles. In 1963, the first gay rights demonstration occurs in NYC at the Whitehall Induction Center. In 1969, on June 28, 1969, the Stonewall Riots begin. In 1970, on June 28, the first Pride Parade is held. In 1980, Pride parades began to spread internationally. In 1994, the six-striped Pride flag was officially established. In 1998, Tammy Baldwin becomes the first openly lesbian candidate elected to Congress. 2009, NYC expands the term gender to include both trans and non-binary individuals. 2003, same-sex marriage becomes legal in Canada. 2004, Massachusetts becomes the first state in the US to recognize same-sex marriage on a legal level. In 2015, same-sex marriage becomes legal across the United States. So we're going to go more in detail about the historical events, specifically the Stonewall Riots. In the 60s, it was common for American police to raid bars and nightclubs where gay men and women would frequent. On June 28, 1969, police officers raided the Stonewall nightclub and removed and arrested patrons and employees, swiftly targeting drag queens and others who were cross-dressing. Sparked by this particular raid, many people began protesting and fighting back against the police for 6 days. Pride Month is held in June in the US and Canada every year in memory of the Stonewall Riots. So Stonewall Riots inciters. Two of the most notable figures from the Stonewall Riots were Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, who are both transgender women of color. It's said that these two women resisted arrest and the first breaks at police officers. However, Johnson has stated that she did not arrive to the riots until after it had begun. Johnson and Rivera were trans women of color and activists who spent their life fighting for equality and were central figures in the gay liberation movement of the 1970s in the United States. At the beginning of the Stonewall Riots, Johnson and Rivera founded STAR. This was a group which focused on providing shelter and support to queer homeless youth. Then we have the first Pride parades. The world's first Pride parade was held on June 28 in 1970, 1 year after the Stonewall Riot. In New York, it was mainly an event to connect LGBTQ plus activists and demand rights. Other cities such as LA and Chicago also had pride parades that had more celebrations. By 1980, the idea of pride parades had spread internationally, and parades were held in cities like Montreal, London, Mexico City, and Sydney. Today, pride parades are still held globally every year and are a place where everyone celebrates the LGBTQIA plus community. Then we have the Toronto Bathhouse Raids. Operation Soap took place in 1981 when 200 police officers conducted coordinated raids of 4 Toronto bathhouses with the purpose of arresting gay men under the guise of alleged sex work and indecent acts. Nearly 300 men were charged and subjected to excessive force and verbal harassment by police. This sparked protests from the gay community demanding better treatment from the police, the media, and the public. And we have the AIDS epidemic. HIV first arrived in the US around 1970 and came into public attention in the 1980s. Gay men were disproportionately affected by HIV and AIDS. By 1979, 27,408 Americans died from AIDS. Because the crisis was mostly affecting gay and low-income communities, government response was minimal. Many lesbian volunteers in hospitals went in to take care of AIDS patients as they were dying. Swiftly, the San Diego Blood Sisters group conducted blood drives for AIDS patients. From 1987 to 2009, HIV positive individuals were prohibited from entering the US. Both American and Canadian governments banned gay and bisexual men from donating blood to the risk of HIV. And though the restrictions have been lessened a bit, it's still difficult for LGBTQ men to donate blood. So, moving on, we're going to talk about more notable figures. Simply Bayard Rustin. Bernard Rustin worked closely with Martin Luther King Jr., an organizer, and he was the organizer of the 1963 March on Washington. Since he was an openly gay man, he did not receive wide recognition for his role in the civil rights movement. In fact, Rustin's sexuality was used against him, and Dr. King, by opposing parties, threatened to spread lies about the relationship. To prevent further controversy, Rustin was forced to work in the shadows. Despite this, Rustin still remained a political and gay activist and worked to bring the AIDS crisis to national attention. Then we had Edith Windsor. Edith Windsor's wife, Thea Spire, died in 2009, igniting a court battle that would change LGBTQ rights forever. The federal government did not recognize their marriage, so Windsor was left to pay $350,000 in estate taxes. Refusing to accept these terms, Edith fought against the Defense of Marriage Act in court. The case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, which ruled that Section 3 of DOMA, the act which prevented the federal government from recognizing any same-sex marriages, was unconstitutional. Edith Windsor's advocacy paved the way for the legalization of same-sex marriage. So, moving on, we're going to talk about the modern inequality. Swiftly, how is the LGBTQ plus community affected today? Homophobia. Homophobia is discrimination against someone for their sexual orientation. It can manifest as negative stereotypes, bullying online or in person, exclusion, disgust, and verbal and physical abuse and assault. Homophobia is closely related to sexism, as gay men are often criticized for being too feminine and lesbians as not feminine enough. Religious discrimination and persecution. Many religious and spiritual sects will condemn homosexuality for being unnatural, even though cases of natural gender and sexual variance are common in plants and animals. To this day, LGBTQ plus people around the world are cast out of their families, communities, and homes for their sexuality on the basis of religion. In many countries and regions, still imprison or even kill people for their sexual orientation. Gay rights around the world. Only 30 countries have legalized gay marriage, and only 5% of UN member states have protections against sexual orientation-based discrimination in their constitution. And in more than 70 countries, homosexuality is illegal and can even be punished with imprisonment or the death penalty. As you can see in this map, you can see the places in the world where gay marriage is legalized and other places where it's not. So in blue, you can see that gay marriage is legalized in places such as Canada, America, and some parts over here. We can also see in other places in the world, it may be legal, but there's still lots of discrimination, and also where places where being gay, lesbian, bisexual, and being part of the LGBT community, it can result in death penalty, imprisonment, and other things like that. In other places, there's no recognition at all. So let's talk about youth statistics. 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ+. LGBTQ+ youth are 1.75 times more likely to experience anxiety or depression. 34% of the LGBTQ+ youth experience bullying on school property. LGBTQ+ teens are 2 to 3 more times likely to commit suicide than others. So let's talk about LGBTQ seniors. Even in countries where same-sex relationships are now legal, not all LGBTQ+ seniors want to come out openly or be considered part of the LGBT community due to a long history of discrimination, exclusion, intimidation, and violence. Since LGBTQ representation in some sense has not become mainstream and widespread until the past 2 decades or so, many LGBTQ seniors have spent the majority of their lives keeping their sexuality a secret, and many continue to do so. Due to this and other factors, LGBTQ+ seniors experience more social isolation on average than heterosexual seniors. So now we're going to talk about discrimination specifically in North America. So specifically, there has been a rise in anti-trans legislation. 2021 was a record-breaking year of anti-trans legislation in the US, as 33 states introduced more than 100 bills with the intention of reducing rights of trans people nationwide. These include bans on participation in youth sports and gender-affirming healthcare for minors, curriculum bans, ID restrictions, and more. And recently, there's been the Don't Say Gay bill. Earlier in 2022, Florida banned sexual orientation education from kindergarten to grade 3. This prevents teachers from speaking with students about matters of LGBTQ+ identity and essentially pretend that it doesn't exist. So next we have conversion therapy. It's the practice of trying to change an individual's sexual orientation from gay, bi, etc. to straight, often forcefully. There have been many cases of physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. Children who were suspected to do conversion therapy are more likely to experience depression, substance abuse, and contract STDs or HIV. 698,000 LGBTQ+ American adults have received conversion therapy. It was only until recently it was banned in Canada, specifically January of this year. It is not outlawed in the US nationwide and still a common practice in many areas. 20,000 LGBTQ+ youth will receive conversion therapy from a licensed healthcare professional before they even reach the age of 18 in the 41 states that currently do not ban the practice. So now we're going to talk about hate crimes and harassment. In 2019, hate crimes against Canadian LGBTQ individuals went up 41%, half of which were violent crimes. Also, in 2019, gender identity bias hate crimes in the US went up by 20%. LGBTQ individuals are twice as likely to experience inappropriate behaviors or harassment in public. So now we're going to talk about heteronormality. Not all forms of discrimination are overt and obvious. Heteronormality is the concept that our society is so ingrained with heterosexual culture, we tend to forget about differing sexual identities. In short, the assumption that everyone is straight, heterosexual. In every facet of our lives, TV and books, the education system, mainstream language, and events all frequently about LGBTQ plus experiences and opinions. Example of day-to-day may be comments such as, your little boy is so handsome, he's going to be a lady killer, or you'll understand when you have a husband and kids one day. Oh, you'll look prettier in dresses and makeup, you should wear that instead. Because of this assumed strictness, LGBTQ plus people have to come out every day at risk of negative reaction. Though it may seem harmless, heteronormality can lead to identity confusion, shame, and internalized homophobia. Lastly, we're going to talk about allyship. How can we be better allies and promote inclusivity? Some do's and don'ts on how to be a good ally is do respect LGBTQ plus status, but don't tokenize LGBTQ people. Do listen and validate the experience of LGBTQ plus people, and keep in mind that everyone is different. Make sure to not assume someone's sexual orientation or gender identity when you meet them, and don't use stereotypes or offensive language, but do speak about against harassment, bullying, and discrimination, especially when you see it. It's also important to remember that words are important. Language is how we express and identify ourselves, and it is always evolving. Some people are empowered by labels, while others find them constricting. Many words that used to be considered fine to use in the past are now considered offensive by many, whereas other words that were considered offensive have now been reclaimed. So make sure to stay up to date with the terminology and language, and if you're not sure how to refer to someone, simply just ask them. You can also make sure to seek support. These organizations, as listed here, offer support through text, chat, and phone calls. So some of these organizations include the Trevor Project, National Resource Center on LGBTQ plus Aging, Rainbow Railroad, the LGBT Foundation, and Gender Spectrum. So also, you can also do some further learning. So here are some more resources for further learning. So we have some videos, movies, and TV show recommendations, such as Heartstopper, which is available on Netflix, as well as Schitt's Creek. We have a documentary called Pride Denied, Homo Nationalism and the Future of Queer Politics, and also another TED Talk and a YouTube video, which you can access clicking these links. We have some websites which have LGBTQ resources for seniors, and also a timeline so you can dive into the history of Pride Month. Then we have some book recommendations such as Surrender Your Sons by Adam Sass, All Boys Are in Blue, and Memoir Manifesto by George M. Johnson. Our Work is Everywhere, an illustrated oral history of queer and trans resistance by Sayan Rose. So I would just like to thank you all for listening. And yeah, thank you so much. And then we're going to go into the group activity.